Within just the first few minutes of the film, Moana reveals her internal pull toward the ocean. Her father finds her by the edge of the water and scoops her up, taking her to the village where he feels she should be, and thereby separating her from the ocean where she feels she's called to be. Moana says, "I want to go back." But why, Moana? Why do you want to go back to the ocean? Your father said no. Look, you've got a place to be as the next village chief. But that pull toward the ocean never leaves Moana. Even as a teenager, she sings her sad teenage rebellion song. See, the line where the sky meets the sea, it calls me. But what is the it that calls her? Perhaps it's not an it, but rather an id.
Down with DCE.
Yeah, you know me.
You down with DCE?
Yeah, you know me.
You down with DCE?
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with DCE?
This video will use Freud's concepts of the id, ego, and superego to understand the mental complexity that is Moana. Sigmund Freud was a very influential figure for the field of child development. Although much of his theory has been criticized and rejected, he was one of the first to really stress the early years as formative for one's future developmental outcomes. Within the psychoanalytical approach, he proposed psychosexual developmental stages, whereby the interaction between one's internal drives and one's social environment established patterns, positive or negative, that impacted one's future developmental trajectory. Freud proposed that these interactions between internal drives and the social environment flow between three major structures of the mind: the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is inborn and present at birth. It's the source of innate biological needs and desires. The id desires instant satisfaction. It wants something and it wants it now. Although the id is present in all of us throughout our lives, you can see the id clearly in infancy. An infant has wants and expects those wants to be serviced immediately. The ego acts as a mediator between the id and the superego. It realizes that the id has desires and needs, but may try to introduce logical reasoning to the id to stop or at least delay those desires. It realizes that the superego is providing conscientious concern based on societal expectations, but may try to reason that some expectations may not be appropriate for every scenario. So the ego is in the middle, trying to bring logical reasoning to the id's immediate desires and superego's rules and regulations. The superego is the final structure to develop. You can think of the superego as the conscience, a moral compass that distinguishes right from wrong for us. It is a moral compass set by others, society, culture, religion, parents, etc., with rules and regulations. The superego butts heads with both the id and the ego. When the id wants to satisfy an internal desire, the superego reminds the id that there are rules and regulations that prohibit acting upon that desire. When the ego tries to bring logical reasoning, the superego perceives thinking as bad. There are rules and regulations, and they must simply be obeyed. When Moana sings the lyrics, "It called me," Freud might argue that it was not an it that called her, but rather an id. Why did Moana desire the ocean? I don't know. I mean, no one else on the island seemed to have her burning urge to cannonball into cold water. Her desire just seems to be something innate, internal, and she made it clear that she is willing to do anything to scratch her itch for the ocean. Sound familiar? The id. Her father stating that it's dangerous. Moana doesn't care. Her mother's story of how her father's friend died at sea. Moana isn't scared. Crashing her boat for the first time she tried to sail, getting her foot stuck underwater and almost dying herself. No lesson was strong enough to prevent her desire for the ocean. Moana is the perfect representation of Freud's psychological id structure. She is purely driven by some internal desire where logical ego reasoning and superego's rules and regulations only get in the way of what she wants. Moana's father is the chief of the village of Montanui, and as chief, it was his responsibility to look over the village, its people, and the island they inhabit. One rule he established to keep everyone safe was to prohibit sailing beyond the reef. In fact, in the film, we only see those who are fishing in the sea. Everyone else seems stuck to the island. A critical moment occurs when those fishing approach Chief Tui, exclaiming that there are no fish in the water. Moana is standing there as well and advises him to fish other areas around the island, not knowing that they'd already tried that. Then Moana suggests that they go beyond the reef. Her father quickly shuts down that idea. No one goes beyond the reef. When Moana tries to reason that desperate times, no fish, no food, call for desperate measures, and maybe this one rule could be bent for this unique situation, her dad responds, "We have one rule, a rule that keeps us safe." Chief Tui embodies the role of the superego because his decisions are not about wants or about reasoning. His decisions are about conforming to the rules and values of society. Moana suggests changing the rules to fit a changing food supply. But Chief Tui does not allow thinking that challenges the established rules. He doesn't even ponder the possibility. His response is quick and firm. The id and the superego are in constant battle, and Moana and her father represent this battle perfectly, as they seem to only be able to disagree on everything. Although one could reason that there are a few character candidates to represent Freud's psychological structure, the ego, I think that the best choice is Moana's grandmother, Grandma Tala. Now, Freud proposed that the ego is in the middle, mediating between the id and the superego. Throughout the film, Grandma Tala seems to be teeter-tottering between allowing Moana, the id, to explore her internal desires for the ocean, while simultaneously not completely dismantling the walls of restriction enforced by Moana's father, the superego. There is one key moment in the movie that demonstrates why Grandma Tala is the ego. Right after Moana attempts to sail out past the reef by herself, gets her boat flipped, is momentarily stuck underwater, and then washed up on the shore, Moana says, "He was right about going out there. It's time to put my stone on the mountain." Grandma Tala responds, "Okay, well then head on back, put that stone up there." Moana looks back and says, "Why aren't you trying to talk me out of it?" And Grandma Tala responds, "You said that's what you wanted." Watching the movie, it's clear that Moana still has the itch for the ocean, despite verbally seeming to agree with her father about being correct about her future path as village chief. This moment is key because Grandma Tala is not pushing Moana one way or the other. She knows that Moana still has saltwater curiosity, but as the ego, it's her job to try to reconcile both the id and the superego. Rather than just give the id what it wants, in that moment, the ego may try to delay gratification, to see if it's something that it really wants or could get in a more appropriate way, and perhaps find a way to also get the superego to warm up to the id's desires. Immediately after Grandma Tala delays Moana's internal desire, she shows her the secret lair where her father has hidden the ships of their ancestors. But why? Moana just crashed trying to sail, and now her grandma shows her an entire fleet of larger ships? Why? As the ego, this was a move not only for Moana, but also for Moana's father. Grandma Tala knew Moana would be excited, but she also must have known that Moana would tell her father about the ships. So, what was Grandma Tala secretly up to? Simple, to reconcile the goals of both the id and the superego, like the good ego that she is. So how could Grandma Tala make both parties happy, Moana has the annoying, burning desire to do anything related to the ocean, so satisfying her is easy. Check. Chief Tui is more of a challenge, but the secret ships represent a strong memory for him. A memory of who his ancestors were, and a memory of his joy of being on the water. And the ships also represent a way to overcome the challenges of eating on the slowly dying island. Less fish and coconuts are available for harvesting. Sailing beyond the reef could lead to catching more fish. When that doesn't work, her death sure seems to be the perfect catalyst to bring both the id and the superego together. Sigmund Freud is known for much more than just the ideas discussed in this short video. The movie Moana presents a few main characters that can be used to analyze Freud's psychological structures, the id, superego, and ego. Although this video used individual characters to represent each of the separate structures, Freud proposed that each of us has all three structures working in our heads. And that brings me comfort, knowing that when my id and my superego are in conflict and I question my identity in the middle of the ocean, Grandma Tala is on her way, disguised as a manta ray, to sing me a song of consolation.